this session. And even if it were to pass both chambers, the White House has already indicated the president will not sign it. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, even though it's unlikely the Equality Act will go anywhere in the Senate, it is significant in that it shows the direction of the Democratic Party. And what caught our attention is an op-ed piece in USA Today by Brad Polumbo. He is a gay conservative who says the Equality Act would crush religious freedom. Polumbo is a USA Today contributor and an editor at Young Voices. He joins us with more now. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
It seems that most gay rights advocates support the Equality Act, but you think it goes too far. Tell us about your concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is true that the mainstream kind of LGBT activist community, which skews progressive, is fully behind this bill. But a lot of more level-headed gay rights advocates like myself recognize that a bill that erases the rights of religious liberty of conservative and religious Americans is not what tolerance and not what equality actually looks like.
You are advocating something called the, quote, fairness for all approach, which aims to protect, as I understand it, civil rights for LGBTQ people, but also protect those with traditional beliefs on sexuality. Talk more about how this approach would work.
Absolutely. So this approach was put out by a Council for Religious Freedom, and the point of it is to fill in the gaps in an existing law, which would strengthen anti-discrimination protections for sexual orientation and for gender. And I mean, in my opinion, how I see it, there's no reason that a random secular grocery store should be able to fire someone for being gay, or a doctor shouldn't be able to refuse to vaccinate a person who happens to be transgender. But that's different than having an expansive, comprehensive law that would force doctors to perform medical surgeries, gender transition surgeries against their will, that would violate their conscious rights, or a law that defines public accommodations so loosely that it would force Catholic schools to hire people who are not living according to the Catholic faith, and so on. So I think that you can have a law, you can have an approach that bolsters anti-discrimination laws, but doesn't trample over the rights of religious Americans.
At this point in time, how much momentum would you say that this approach has? We're not hearing a lot about it.
Well, it has very little momentum, unfortunately, because I think you see with probably, I'd say, about 80% of people in the LGBT community, they've still kind of fallen under this progressive sway where they're not really pursuing tolerance, because tolerance is a two-way street. What they're pursuing is it's our turn now, and they're looking to impose their views, to impose their outcome onto others. And I think ultimately that's going to be self-defeating. So this approach isn't getting a lot of attention, but if you ask me, it should be.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that there is this fairness for all approach and the concern about balancing rights. And then there's also feminists, as you saw or heard in the earlier piece, who are opposing the Equality Act. Right now, it doesn't appear that it is going to win in the Senate. But I'm just wondering what you're hearing. What kind of attention do you think it might get in the Senate at this point in time?
Well, I don't think it will come up for a vote in the Senate, although there are actually a few Republicans like Susan Collins who are on board with it. But what I want to point out is that the Trump administration, even if it were to pass, would veto it. And I think it's important to look at what they said. You know, a senior Trump administration official was quoted by the Washington Blade, which broke this scoop, saying that President Trump would veto the bill. But when you look at his statement, right, because people are going to scream, oh, Trump is homophobic and all this, when you look at their statement, they say very clearly, they don't want anyone to be discriminated against. They want the law to protect everyone, but that has to include pathways for religious liberty. So that's why the Trump administration would oppose this bill, even if it were to get out of the Senate. And I think they'd be right to do so.
Very interesting politics here. Brad Polumbo, thanks for your time.